Another week of drama at Tottenham Hotspur awaits us, with Fabrizio Romano giving the latest on Tottenham triggering Morgan Gibbs-White's £60 million release clause at Nottingham Forest, a fee that Spurs will have to pay up front if the deal is to go through. I'll explain why. I'll also be bringing you news on QT Romero's likely stay at Tottenham Hotspur now, and the latest on the investment that is funding this summer's spending spree. All that and more on today's daily Tottenham Hotspur transfer news. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in and listening wherever you are. Please do give this a like on YouTube and press subscribe. And also, if you haven't already, do press that bell button for notifications as to whenever I bring you my daily content. All right, but let's get going. And as I mentioned, the transfer Don, Fabrizio Romano, has spoken a lot about what is going on at Spurs, especially with the Morgan Gibbs-White deal. But firstly, on QT Romero, he says he expects him to stay at Tottenham this summer unless something surprising, in his words, happens. Now, for me, something surprising would be Real Madrid coming out of nowhere and being willing to meet Daniel Levy's asking price for Christian Romero, which I think is as much as £80 million. The likelihood of that, I think, is very, very small at this stage because they spent £50 million on Howson. There have been a lot of rumblings coming out of the Bernabeu since their early exit from the Club World Cup that they are not happy with some of the attitudes of some of the players. And in reality, I think there's maybe more of a rebuild on their hands there than they realized. And Xabi Alonso, the new manager who took over from Carlo Ancelotti, I think is going to have to do some signing of younger players, kind of younger, exciting talent to come up all at once a little bit. And I'm not sure if Christian Romero at £80 million is going to allow them to then spend a lot of money elsewhere as well. So I think Romero might have himself in a bit of a bind. The good news for Spurs is, of course, we do have Champions League football next season. So I think that softens it a little bit in terms of Romero being willing to stay one more year. And now that Atletico Madrid have dropped their interest in him, I don't see another club coming in. There were some whispering, that Liverpool might be interested in Romero. But with all the money they've spent on Florian Wirtz, and they've got numerous interests elsewhere as well with potential transfer signings. Actually, with this morning, Benjamin Sesko's agents reportedly reaching out to Liverpool to see if they wanted to sign him now that Arsenal are going for Victor Gyökeres. I cannot see Liverpool coming in with £80 million, and it might even be more. It might even be more if they wanted to get Romero. I could see why Liverpool would be interested because realistically, Virgil van Dijk, even though he just signed a new contract, he is into his mid-30s now, and they will be looking at succession planning there. But no, for me, I don't see Liverpool coming in for Romero. I don't see Atletico now coming back in because they've been put off by Daniel Levy's asking price. And I think Real Madrid have got problems elsewhere. And that's why I think Romero will be staying at Tottenham. And as I said a few times earlier this summer, it would not surprise me at all if come the beginning of this season, Christian Romero is the Tottenham Hotspur captain. And if he's given the armband and the full responsibility to try and lead this team to something glorious again, then maybe a new contract could be in the offering too. And if he does sign a new contract, he would become the highest paid player at Tottenham Hotspur. And I think that's fair enough. But also, I imagine there would be a release clause in there, probably for around £100 million. And that for me would be absolutely fine. Sign a new long-term deal, give him the responsibility to lead this club the way that he leads Argentina, the way that he takes the responsibility. I know he's not the captain of Argentina, but he is the fulcrum of that team defensively. And you know how Lionel Messi talks about him as being the most important player in that team. So that's what I'm saying. Thomas Frank, I think, is a clever man. I think he'll realize this. I'm not suggesting it would be easy to take the captaincy off Sonny, but what I'm saying is if Thomas Frank has an honest conversation with Sonny and says, look, we're going to be managing your minutes this season. You're not going to be starting every game. And as a result, I'm going to have to make a captain someone who does start every single game they're available for. Then that is why I would give it to QT Romero. But let me know what you think. Listen, this is subjective. This is just how I see it. One of the things that really makes me completely believe that that's the right way to go. Have you seen the social media clip, the video of QT Romero when the final whistle goes in the Europa League final? He's basically in tears. He's basically crying. So don't tell me he doesn't care about this club. Don't tell me he doesn't care about leading us to glory. He does. And I think he's the kind of captain who people will listen to. And it might even inspire him to learn the language a bit more. And I certainly think it'll inspire him to kind of rid himself of this kind of Argentina over Tottenham thing. If he is the captain of Spurs, if he wore the armband, I think Spurs would become much, much more important to him in terms of playing every single game and concentrating every single game. But like I said, that's just my thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comments. Fabrizio Romano has also talked about what Tottenham will be doing next as and when the Morgan Gibbs-White deal goes through. He says, keep an eye on a midfielder as the next signing for Tottenham now. Now, a lot of reports doing the rounds that Spurs are seriously in for Adam Wharton as the third triumvirate of Premier League exciting, kind of oven-ready, box-fresh players for this first team of Tottenham this season. It is expected that once the Morgan Gibbs-White deal goes through, that we will go hard for Adam Wharton. Crystal Palace now have found out their fate. They have been demoted to the Conference League. And as a result, I think that might make it a little bit more important for them to maybe get some money in from player sales. And I think it's going to make it more likely that some of those players at Crystal Palace will be itching to move elsewhere. Eze, obviously, looking like he's likely to move to Arsenal. Gay has interest from both Liverpool and Newcastle, but Spurs are seemingly the only team properly interested in Adam Wharton, and it is a rumor that will not go away. So keep your eye on that. Thomas Frank, according to some reports, has told Daniel Levy to sign Adam Wharton for Tottenham. The interest is genuine, and they would make a move if he became available. It's likely that Palace would want in excess of £80 million. So let me know in the comments, do you think this new Tottenham, with this investment that I'll talk a bit about later in the episode, might likely break their transfer record for a proper number 6 in Adam Wharton, who is I think I probably said it before, but he reminds me of Michael Carrick in his pomp. Loves to get on the ball, but also his movement, his vision, the way he picks up spaces. Really, really impressive young player. And again, sticking with the transfer strategy, even at a price like £80 million for a player that talented, there's a sell-on market for him as well, because this would then be potentially, if Adam Wharton, really improved at the rate you might think he would based on the Premier League performances he's put in so far for Crystal Palace, and of course he's an England international, then he could then become a future £150 million player. I know that might sound mad right now, but I'm talking about he's like 19 years old. I'm talking about 6, 7, 8 years into the future when potentially he might look for his next move to a Crystal Palace or a Barcelona. Sky Sports News say no new developments in the Morgan Gibbs-White situation as of last night, but Spurs are hopeful about getting this one over the line. But Fabrizio Romano says, despite Nottingham Forest's frustration, Tottenham maintain their position and are convinced about their behaviour in terms of proceeding with Gibbs-White. In terms of, they don't think they've done anything wrong. They gave their offer of £60 million officially. That does trigger the release clause. Nottingham Forest's chairman, Marinakis, is absolutely livid about it. But realistically, he's livid because he put the release clause in there. He allowed it to be in there. And there's nothing they can do now. And Romano goes on to say they're still hopeful and confident to get the Gibbs-White deal done soon, even though Nottingham Forest are prepared to fight. Well, it's going to be a fruitless fight. And some of you will have been on my live stream on Friday where I talked about this, but the reality of Marinakis is this is about the 4th or 5th time that he has threatened legal action against people around the industry of the Premier League in the last 6 months. He threatened to sue Gary Neville because Gary Neville said that it was ridiculous that Marinakis ran onto the pitch to admonish Nuno Espirito Santo after a game. Well, it was ridiculous. You showed that you're unable to control your emotions, and that's what he's doing now in terms of trying to block Morgan Gibbs-White from getting his move to Tottenham Hotspur. Mate, it's not going to happen. And another thing I'm going to say is Nottingham Forest fans have really surprised me this weekend. I see Nottingham Forest as a historical, huge club. They've won the European Cup. Yes, they've been in the doldrums for a while, but they're a great club with great fans. But this weekend, I've been really surprised. A lot of Nottingham Forest fans having a dig at Tottenham, saying they don't understand why Morgan Gibbs-White would want to move to Spurs. Tottenham have just won the Europa League. Tottenham were in the Champions League final 5.5, 6 years ago. To describe Tottenham as a club that you wouldn't want to move to, we just moved into a 62,000-seater stadium. It's like the second, third biggest stadium in the Premier League. It's widely seen as the best stadium in the land. Spurs have the best training ground in the land, and Tottenham are building a young, exciting, hungry team of talent. If you're Morgan Gibbs-White right now, you would look at Spurs and think, well, I can play in the Champions League and I can grow with an exciting team with a manager who's going to put his arm around my shoulder and help develop me. So I've been really shocked and surprised. I get the Nottingham Forest fans are upset at the moment because their most important player looks like he's coming to us. But I think you've got to sometimes look at these things realistically. I'm not going to look at a Real Madrid and say, if Lucas Bergvall wants to move to Real Madrid, say, well, why would he want to move to Real Madrid? It doesn't make any sense. I'm not saying that Tottenham are as big as Real Madrid, but I'm saying we are in the Champions League. We have been in the Champions League regularly for the last 15 seasons. And Nottingham Forest have literally only just come up a couple of seasons ago and then had one good season where they dropped off at the end. So, I've just been really surprised by Nottingham Forest fans. But anyway, meanwhile, Alistair Gold says kind of similar messaging, really. Spurs remain hopeful of proceeding with the Morgan Gibbs-White deal. And while a delay appears inevitable, there's also a feeling within Nottingham Forest that they could be powerless to stop the transfer. In terms, I imagine you're all thinking, well, how long will this delay be? I mean, how long is a piece of string? But I imagine there will be talks behind the scenes. I do wonder whether maybe Forest will try and get a Spurs player in return somehow for a very cheap amount of money. They'll be trying to do some negotiations, but let's see what happens. Tom Allnut, also really great journalist who is on the Tottenham Way podcast, which you should listen to if you don't, says Spurs have not had any communication that legal action has been taken against them and have declined to comment on Forest's reported claims. And he also said it is understood that Morgan Gibbs-White is seeking a fresh challenge at Spurs under new coach Thomas Frank. One thing I saw which was interesting from a Nottingham Forest fan podcast this weekend was them saying that they felt after the March international break, it became clear to them that Morgan Gibbs-White would want to leave in the summer. And that is because they feel that Thomas Tuchel, the England manager, made it clear that players who are not playing in the Champions League would not be picked for his squads. Now, that doesn't ring totally true because obviously for the last squad, he picked Ivan Toney, who's playing in Saudi Arabia. But maybe it was after that squad that they were told, because Morgan Gibbs-White was an absolute mainstay of the England team under Lee Carsley when the under-21 manager took over in interim charge of the England national team. And Gibbs-White played brilliantly in those games. And then suddenly under Tuchel, he was out. So that is why I think Morgan Gibbs-White's agent has potentially broken his NDA and let it be known to clubs that he has a £60 million release clause valid during this month. And Tottenham have straight away gone in for it. Now, here's another interesting bit of news. As I mentioned at the top of the show, football agent Sky Andrew. Now, I have to say, I'm not the biggest fan of Sky Andrew because he's always been Sol Campbell's agent and he negotiated Sol Campbell's deal to go to the South Woolwich Arsenal. However, he gave a really interesting insight into how release clauses work. He said this: a club that has the player's registration has the right, with the release clause, to demand the £60 million up front, not in installments. The buying club will have to pay the money in the terms that Nottingham Forest want. Now, that to me is where, if Tottenham do get this deal through and Forest insist that they pay it up front, that is where we will know for sure that Tottenham have investment into the club, new investment, either that being investment from ENIC or investment from, as some of the rumors report, and I'll talk about in a bit more details later in the episode, from potentially a Saudi or Qatari investor with money going into ENIC for ENIC to then push into the club. Anyway, Sky Andrew went on to say, Morgan Gibbs-White is a £100 million player. It's a case now of how much will the club pay for the player, and it won't be £60 million. It will have to be more, probably. Forest have to decide what they want to do, as once a player says they want to leave, it's very difficult to keep the player at the club. So really interesting insight from Sky Andrew that if Tottenham want to get Morgan Gibbs-White for the £60 million in the release clause, they will have to pay it all up front. And that scans because when Manchester City got Jack Grealish from Aston Villa, they had to pay the £100 million up front. And they did it. Of course they did, because they're Abu Dhabi. They can. But if Tottenham are going to do that, that will show an extreme change of philosophy for Tottenham Hotspur under Daniel Levy, because he has never done that before. Never once. We always insist on eking out the best possible deal we can in terms of payment structure over numerous years. And that's not just us who does that. Everybody does it. But we've never gone in and just paid a release clause up front. Certainly not one of that size. Okay, Paul O'Keefe came out with some really interesting stuff about Spurs over the weekend in terms of the investment. He says, I understand that there will be investment as well as a large sponsorship deal for Tottenham. Interestingly, the changes will see a management reshuffle as well as new roles. It's likely that Daniel Levy will stay, but potentially in a different or reduced and perhaps even non-football related role. Vinay Venkatesham's appointment and the departure of Donna Marie Cullen were the first part of a broad realignment of the club. It remains to be seen what impact that will have on football strategy. The question is whether someone is investing in ENIC for it to invest in the club, or if they are coming in directly. He went on to say that new investment money could be into ENIC, who in turn use the funds for the club. There are numerous options and scenarios, but ultimately funds are coming in. So how fascinating is that? Basically, that is what change for Tottenham have been calling for, what a lot of the Tottenham fan base have been calling for, money to come in, a restructuring of the club. Daniel Levy, maybe even potentially a lot of people, even if they hate him, understand that in terms of business, he is a brilliant, brilliant business leader. So having him in the club in some way, but on a fully non-football related level. There's a lot of talk at the moment about, is it going to be a stadium naming rights deal, etc.? And here's some of that chat. They're close to, apparently, these are some rumors, finalizing a stadium naming rights deal with a Saudi entity being the front runner. Advanced talks currently taking place. Deal makers have put forward two companies, one a public investment fund of Saudi Arabia subsidiary, and a second company that are unaffiliated. Legalities are currently being explored so as not to conflict with Newcastle. That is because Newcastle obviously owned by the PIF, the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia. And if you look at St. James's Park during any games now, it is still called St. James's Park, but it is totally branded with, I think it's Sela, is it? And maybe one other Saudi company. So that's why they're talking about the legalities needing to be checked out. Nothing is guaranteed yet, as Spurs have spoken to American companies as well, but discussions are advanced. Senior government figures have also been involved in talks. So if you had any doubts about the depth with this, with which these talks are taking place, with which these potential changes, how far down the line they are, then maybe you should rule out those doubts right now, because if governmental figures are being involved, that means that it is likely to be in some way a Saudi entity, something where they'll need to get the sign off. And it took Newcastle a long time to get sign off on a Saudi deal. So I wouldn't expect anything, if it was Saudi or Qatari, to be any quicker for Tottenham. But for anybody who's a Spurs fan who is not bothered about the idea of maybe being basically owned by a nation state, then I'm sure these are great words for you to hear. For those of us who probably feel a little more reticent about these kind of things, I've always said about ENIC and Levy, like, I'm not ENIC in or Levy in or ENIC out or Levy out. I'm like, what will happen next? And I have to say, it's difficult. I'm conflicted. It's not ideal for me. I don't want to be owned by an oil state, and I don't want to be a sports washing entity. That's kind of how I feel. But then, I'm conflicted a bit, because last night you watched the World Club Cup final. Suddenly Chelsea have won the World Club Cup, and Donald Trump is there celebrating with them, and they've just earned £121 million, which has all been funded by the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia through their sponsorship deal of DAZN, who then got the broadcasting rights. It's just basically, football is all unbelievably corrupt now. And the reason I'm conflicted is because there is a part of you, as ugly as it sounds, is like, if you can't beat them, join them. I don't like the fact that there is a tiny part of me that feels that way. But it just, when you see Chelsea, who are a basket case of a club, realistically, got in the World Club Cup because they won the Champions League 4 years ago when they were owned by a completely different entity. And now they get £121 million. And not that it really matters, because Chelsea have admitted that they have broken, all of the financial rules of the Premier League in the past 20 years. They've admitted it, and they're waiting for their penalty, which you can guarantee will just be a fine somehow. And that won't make a difference, because they've got money anyway. And then they just sell their hotels to themselves and their women's team at an inflated value anyway. So it's all just incredibly corrupt. And how are Spurs ever going to realistically, sustainably challenge for any of the big trophies? I mean, the proper big trophies like the Premier League and the European Cup, the Champions League, if we are on such a disadvantage in the first place. So that is the reason why I'm conflicted. I hate the fact that I am conflicted, but I don't know. Let me know how you feel in the comments, guys. Just before I go on to some more Tottenham transfer news, once again, thank you so much for watching and listening wherever you are. Please do give this video a like on YouTube if you haven't already. The more likes we get, the more Tottenham fans that this gets pushed out to. So I really appreciate it. And also, do press that subscribe button if you're not already a subscriber for daily Tottenham Hotspur transfer news throughout the summer, and press that bell button so you get a notification of whenever I bring you my content. At the moment, I'm trying to do daily kind of morning transfer news bulletins and then evening live streams where we get to talk to you guys in the comments in real time. Okay, Spurs have also made contact to sign João Paulinho, the former Fulham number 6 from Bayern Munich, with Thomas Frank keen on bringing in more experienced players this summer. Paulinho struggled for game time since Vincent Kompany took over as manager of Bayern Munich and is open to leaving the German club. I like Paulinho. My only real thoughts on João Paulinho is, once again, is he a player who has had his big move, gone on to big wages at a huge club like Bayern Munich, and then therefore, if he came to Tottenham, wouldn't be motivated, wouldn't kind of have the desire to really play 110% every single time for Tottenham Hotspur in that 6th position? If he can prove to Thomas Frank in negotiations that that's what he wants to do and that he wants to show his best football in the Premier League again, then I do think he could be an excellent player for Spurs. But I'm just a little wary of that in the short term. But I do like João Paulinho, and I do think Spurs do need midfield reinforcements, especially because there has been a lot of talk that Fenerbahce sent representatives to London to meet with Yves Bissouma at the back end of last week. Although since then, perhaps they weren't impressed with what they heard, because apparently Fenerbahce have leaked that there are no active talks between them and Spurs over Yves Bissouma. Wouldn't surprise me at all if Bissouma wants to stay at Spurs and fight for his place under Thomas Frank. He did really well in those knockout rounds in the Europa League back end of last season, and he's undoubtedly an incredibly talented player, Bissouma, but it's a matter of, can he keep his concentration up? And if he plays in a double pivot rather than a single number 6 as he had to under Ange Postecoglou at times, maybe he will play a lot better. And I think Thomas Frank will be playing with kind of 2 enforcers in front of the back 4. Just another report from Graham Bailey. Spurs are among several clubs interested in Fulham's young talent Seth Ridgun. I don't know much about that player, but that would fit with Tottenham's transfer strategy, which is to bring in kind of first-team ready players now with Premier League experiences, but also look to pick up some of the best young talent from around the country. And then just a little bit of light relief at the end, guys, for Monday morning. I don't know if you saw this, but Spider-Man himself, Tom Holland, who's a huge Spurs fan, has given some quotes, I think in GQ, about how he felt about Spurs winning the Europa League and where he was for that magnificent night. He said this: I was shooting Christopher Nolan's film in Los Angeles. We were not allowed our phones on set. For those of you who love films, Christopher Nolan is very big on that. So I was not aware of the score. I kept going to the sneaky crew members who I knew always had their phones and kept asking them for updates. I went to my trailer for lunch and caught the last 10 minutes of the game, and my celebration was coming back to the set full of energy and doing a really fantastic scene. So that was really fun. I just was so proud to be a Tottenham fan. What a lad. He said this: I was incredibly happy for Sonny. For me to see him win a trophy after years of dedication to our club. He really could have played for any club. He's a world-class player, but he stuck with his roots and he stayed with Tottenham. Whatever he decides to do now, I think that he can stay at the club or move to another club with a great sense of pride. He'll always be a Tottenham legend. Not to pit them against each other, but while I was happy to see Harry Kane finally lift a trophy with Bayern Munich, surely it meant more to Sonny to have stayed and finished the job here in London. So Tom Holland, great lad, really knows his Spurs. Comes from a really interesting family background, actually. His dad, Dominic Holland, is a comedian and had some kind of TV success back in the 80s and early 90s. And Tom Holland, just a great lad. Good to see a Spurs fan representing us in Hollywood. And I completely agree with everything he said about Sonny. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed this kind of news report on a Monday morning for you. Once again, please do give me a like. Please do press subscribe. And also, if you haven't already, come over to the podcast platforms and give me a like and a subscribe there so you can listen to me when you're out running or driving or whatever. It's the Spurred On podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Come over, give me a rating, a subscribe, and a follow. Enjoy your Mondays, guys, and come on, you Spurs.